everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, June 5th, 2023, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And as always, before we dive into this week's episode, I do want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. But even before I do that, I want to thank you all and I guess apologize. I don't know if I should apologize, but thank you for your patience and your understanding as I slog through the very last few months of my PhD. I'm doing a full-time internship. I'm also podcasting and I'm trying to finish my dissertation. And it is like having 3 full-time jobs. It's great. And so every once in a while, there will probably be an episode that doesn't make it to air, and that's okay. It's not like you're going to miss anything. I'll just push it out the very next week. That happened last week. That's why we had no episode. I always try to let you guys know on social media, but of course, for those of you who don't follow on Twitter or Facebook or any of those places, you may not have seen that there was no new episode and just discovered it yourself. But anyway, I do want to thank you for your patience because we've got a good one for you this week. But again, before we get into it, I do want to thank all of the patrons this week. So remember, Talk Nerdyism will always be 100% free to download. That's because I rely on the support of listeners just like you. This week's top patrons include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, Salmi Mu Manling, and Ulrika Hagman. Thank you all so very much. If you want to pledge your support on an episodic basis, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com/talknerdy. Okay, let's get into it. So this week I had the opportunity to speak with Lizzie Stark, and she has a fascinating career because kind of one of the hats that she wears is that she is what's called a participation designer, meaning that she creates games and interactive theater and LARPs, like live action role plays, for both on her own and also for institutions. But the other hat that she wears is that she is an author, and she's written 3 nonfiction books, and she's also written for a bunch of outlets like Washington Post, Daily Beast, and different places like that. She's got a new book. And it's interesting. It's called Egg, a Dozen Overtures. Yes, I said overtures. It's a topic I never thought we would spend a lot of time talking about on the show, but I'm really glad we did because I learned so much. So without any further ado, here she is, Lizzie Stark. Lizzie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we are going to talk about your newest book, but not your last book. I mean, your last in time, but it won't be your last book. Egg, a Dozen Overtures.
My editor said I get 1 egg pun.
Right there on the cover. That's the way to do it. You just go hard.
I think I slipped a couple under her nose. So.
I love it. And so you are, how would you describe are you a science writer? I mean, it says in your bio that you're an author of 2 nonfiction books. Do you tend to lean more in the science side of nonfiction, or, how would you define yourself?
Yeah, I would say I like to write about transformational experiences, either for me or for other people.
Okay.
So my first book was more of an ethnography, and it was an ethnography of the live action role playing or LARP communities. And then I have a book about cancer. And familial cancer called Pandora's DNA. And that is about the transformational experience of being sick and having surgery. In my case, not being sick, but having the surgery. And then Egg, I think, is also a book about transformation, because an egg can be transformed into so many different things.
So what made you think, I mean, clearly it makes sense, right? You're interested in this state change, this transformational, this, from there to there. But what made you go eggs? I'm going to write about eggs.
Well, a bunch of things. I mean, the first thing is my agent called me and said, "Do you want to write a microhistory of eggs?" And I said, "Yeah." And I ran to my whiteboard, literally ran, and I just diagrammed. I made an enormous mind map immediately. That's how excited I was. So that's the most proximate reason. But my relationship with my dad is also founded on eggs. So he and I have done a ton of cooking experiments together, beginning when I was a little girl and continuing till now. And one of the first and most important of those for my development, I would say, is the soft boiled egg experiment, where he brought home a bunch of cartons of eggs and we boiled eggs for 0 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, and so on up. And then we knocked the tops off and looked inside to see if we could discover our ideal state of soft boiledness. And
What
our
was it?
egg, it was about 3 minutes, 30 seconds or so. But I learned another valuable lesson the following morning, Monday morning, when I rushed downstairs to make the perfect soft boiled egg. In my mind, it was 3 minutes and 26 seconds. Like, we narrowed it down to the second. And so we boiled our eggs and then put them onto toast and cracked them open. And they were like nearly raw on the inside, pretty raw. And it was because for our experiment, we had used room temperature eggs. But on a busy Monday morning, you don't warm the eggs up. You just grab them cold from the fridge. And so they had cooked really unevenly and they were most unappetizing. Yeah. So ever since that, my dad and I have cooked dishes in general together, but a lot of egg dishes of different omelet varieties, I would say. And then the third reason that didn't occur to me until I was about halfway through writing this book was that I woke up one morning and I realized that I was planning to take my ovaries out like soon. And that maybe there was some kind of connection. Didn't seem too far-fetched that there was some kind of psychological connection between removing my eggs and also wanting to write about eggs.
Right. It's interesting because obviously there's an intense profundity there, especially as an individual who has ovaries or and produces eggs, that there's this deep kind of, I don't know, I don't even want to label it, because for some people it's maternal, for some people it's simply somatic, but there's obviously some profundity there. And on the other side of the coin, I don't know, I hear the word egg, I think about eggs, like it's so mundane or almost like gross. Like, to me, I have like a ick factor sometimes with eggs.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things that are a little bit gross about eggs. I mean, bird eggs come out of the cloaca, which is somebody else called it the all-purpose orifice, which is true for birds. Yeah, and they're kind of squishy and oozy and slimy, and I think they're difficult for some people to eat because of that. I know a lot of vegetarians who are kind of borderline about eating eggs. Like, it's fine if they're in a baked good or something, but they might not want to, like have a puddingy plate of them at breakfast, which is my ideal scrambled texture.
Really, I'm the opposite. Yeah,
Yeah.
for me, it's like, it needs to be cooked. If it is not all the way cooked, it's like freaking me out.
Yep. I when I started writing the book, I thought surely all of my friends will have reached my level of egg enlightenment and will prefer their eggs in the puddingy texture, which is obviously like the one correct way to eat eggs. And then I very quickly discovered that my friends like their eggs all different ways, and that my most delightful egg texture is just a nightmare for some of my nearest and dearest. Like, couldn't imagine anything less appetizing to put in their mouths.
Add me to that list.
So yes. So that's one thing I learned about eggs, is that the best way to cook an egg is the way the person who's going to eat it likes it.
Well, it's interesting that with this sort of like very anthropocentric, I should say, actually, this very anthropocentric kind of relationship that many people have with the planet, with other species, just with being alive, this sort of like, I am the actor in my own play relationship, that when you first hear the word egg, I mean, the first thing that most people probably think of is food.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But if you use the Latin name and say ova, then suddenly the
Then they go
possibilities
scientific.
open a lot.
Right. Then we think biology, then we think medicine, then we think, and it's funny if I was a biologist for many years. I think that I hear egg, I don't know, I'm probably about 50-50. Like the biologist in me goes to this place where I envision, different species and the eggs of those species and what they represent and how they do transform. And then about half of me is like, yeah, eggs are things people eat.
Yeah, the context matters a real lot. One of the things I wasn't able to put in the book was some of the cool stuff I learned about fish eggs. Like remote lakes may have fish in them because birds eat the eggs and then poop them out into like the new lake, and the fish survive.
Oh, wow.
On the
impressive.
way. And this may be how some more remote lakes were colonized with fish species, which is, I don't know, it's wild. It's truly wild.
And it's funny because I don't think caviar when I think eggs because I don't eat seafood. And so that's like not where my head, I think chicken eggs because I am an American, you know what I mean? But obviously context matters, and people from different regions are going to be eating the eggs of different species. And that might be what populates their mind when they hear that term, when they free associate.
Yes. For example, in China, there was, believe duck eggs were eaten earlier than chicken eggs commercially. That may be true in more places. And of course, I mean, almost any egg is edible.
Yeah. But we do tend to want to stick with birds. What's that about?
I think it's that they're easy to get and they're everywhere and they're self-contained, like if you collect some fish eggs out of the sea, you better have something to put them in. But you can climb a tree and you can transport bird eggs remarkably long distances.
Why don't we eat like lizard eggs, amphibian eggs, things like that, at least in our culture? I'm sure some cultures do.
Yeah, I think there are a couple answers to that question. And one of them is that in chickens do something that other birds don't do. Somewhere along the line, their bodies began producing unfertilized eggs and laying them. And laying them copiously. So today's commercial chickens are descended from the red jungle fowl and some of the other jungle fowl of Southeast Asia. And those birds lay about 20 eggs per year total in one clutch. And today's commercial layers lay about an egg a day, like 300 plus eggs a year. And chickens, they lay a pile of eggs and they don't begin incubating the eggs until they're like 10 or 15. Then they sit on the nest to hatch the eggs. But if you take the eggs away, they'll just keep producing eggs. So that's one answer, that chickens are copiously productive. And the other answer may be in flavor. Lizard eggs have a kind of leathery shell. It's not hard in the same way a chicken egg shell is. And I've read some accounts that just suggested that they weren't quite as delicious as bird eggs.
Makes sense. And, obviously there's a lot of nutrition. There are a lot of calories in that tiny thing because that's a whole organism or it's the stuff that the whole organism would feed on while it was developing. So maybe actually we should take a step back.
Yeah.
Why don't you let people know, in your words, especially those who are like, I know what an egg is, but I don't really know what an egg is. Kind of, what is it? What is its kind of role biologically?
Yeah, it's the larger of the two reproductive cells in species that reproduce sexually.
Right. And so the larger of the two reproductive cells is also the encasement, I guess you could say. It's the housing for the development of the fertilized organism.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about ova, it's the larger of the two reproductive cells. And when we think of like bird eggs, we of course think of something that's contained in that calcium carbonate shell. But that whole thing is, by some measures, one cell, making the ostrich egg the largest cell in the world.
Oh,
currently.
that makes sense, I guess. And so, like, when we think about human beings, when we think about birds, when we think about mammals, the idea here is that the other, the very, very small of the reproductive cells, somehow penetrates the large, the ova.
Kind of depends on the species. One of
Okay.
the surprising things I learned about birds. Okay, so in humans, one sperm, one egg, occasionally two sperm, like once in a blue moon, and then you get a baby or something that can develop
Few
into a
steps in
baby.
between.
Few steps in between. There's like some miles to go there. Well, in birds require polyspermy in order to produce a viable embryo. So, bird like chicken, uh, the female chicken's cloaca has like a little wine cellar where it can store sperm for as long as it wants. And then when the date of conception is nearing, when there's a ripe yolk beginning to go into the oviduct, there are little organs inside the reproductive tract that kind of pass the sperm up to where the egg is. And chickens require polyspermy, so fertilization by multiple sperm simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Interesting.
that creates the embryo that then, gets the yolk attached.
And so obviously when chicken eggs are fertilized, and those, that's different from what we'll get into what we eat versus what we don't eat. But like when chicken eggs are fertilized and actually do get hatched into baby chickens, are they chimeric? Like, do they actually show genetic, I guess, do they have the genotype and then develop into the phenotype of multiple different sperm, or does like one of them dominate on their genetics?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that chickens sometimes exhibit mosaicism.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of in-between genders for chickens.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you can end up with a chicken that's like a rooster on one side and a hen on the other side. Or the mosaicism can be front back, or it can be in patches throughout the chicken. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think I was so blown away by the polyspermy that I didn't think to ask that question, but it's a really good question.
Yeah. So obviously the egg itself is this cell, right? That very often the female of the species produces. Very often the male of the species has some sort of mobile cell, a swimming cell. That's what we're used to thinking about, like what human sperm looks like. It actually does enter into the larger, and the DNA is combined inside of there. And then through a series of events, this organism grows. But I think the thing that's so interesting to me is that large cell, especially when we're talking specifically about the ovum, it has like all the nutritional stuff that the little organism needs, right? It's not just like a warm bed.
Yeah, it has the literal stuff of life in it. I found looking at the biology of a chicken egg to be quite interesting. So, first of all, when you crack it into a bowl, and wait a minute, there's a pale spot that rises to the top of the yolk, and that is the germinal disc, the DNA the hen contributes. And you can see it with your naked eye, like anytime you crack an egg in a bowl. And then the yolk is the foodstuff for the developing chick. And then there's a layer of tight white that contains the yolk, and it has two ropey ends on it called the chalizae. And those tether the yolk to either pole of the egg to keep the yolk suspended in the middle. Because if the yolk floats up to touch the top shell or sinks down to touch the bottom part of the shell, the embryo can develop fused to the shell and not survive. And then the egg white is actually, it provides some water for the growing embryo, but it's also a microbial defense, which I thought was pretty fascinating. It's got a lot of protein in it, but the proteins are bound up in such a way that bacteria can't use them for energy. And it also contains enzymes which kill bacteria when they are gently heated to the temperature of a chicken's butt.
Is this also why in like pretty much most European countries, like most countries except America, people don't refrigerate their eggs.
Yeah, that has to do with something further outside of the shell. So
Okay.
going back to the white, there's like tight white, loose white, tight white, loose white. And then outside of that, there's a shell membrane, which is a couple mesh-like layers of keratin that are like a sieve, preventing large bacteria from getting in. And then there's the shell, which is calcium carbonate, and it has pores all over it, which allow for gas exchange. They let oxygen in and they let microbial water out. And at the blunt end of the egg, as soon as the egg is laid, that inner membrane shrinks as it cools, and it creates an air pocket that's like a little oxygen tank for the chick because it's about to hatch. A lot of chicks have these egg teeth, which is like a little bump on the end of the beak, and they use it to punch through the shell membrane, and then they can suck in that oxygen and get their lungs working so they can build the strength to burst out of the shell. And then on the other side of the shell, there's something called the cuticle, which is a bit sticky, and it's another barrier to microbial entry. But because it is a bit sticky when it's laid, things like poop and feathers can stick to it. Not a lot, usually just a little bit. And so in the US, we power wash that off. And that leaves the egg more vulnerable to infection. So we refrigerate them to slow the growth of any bacteria that have made it in.
But why do we power wash it off?
Because the American consumer prefers a spotlessly clean egg with nothing sticking to it. And in Europe, they leave it on. And so you can keep the eggs out at room temperature because they have that natural microbial defense.
I always thought it had something to do with the fact, don't we like irradiate our eggs also? Or is that like a whole separate thing?
You know, I'm not actually sure if we irradiate our eggs. I didn't come across anything that said that we do. Honestly, it wouldn't like shock me if we did. I know we irradiate a lot of our produce.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the eggs just go fresh from the hen to the power washer and then straight into the fridge, as far as I know.
I'm looking online on the FDA's website, and they're saying that we do irradiate. It's probably not all eggs, but vegetables, some eggs. Let's see. It's approved. There we go. The FDA has approved food for irradiation: beef and pork, crustaceans, fresh fruits and vegetables, poultry, seeds, shell eggs, shellfish, and spices.
Shell eggs. Interesting.
Yeah.
There's also a huge market for liquid egg products. So all of the not great quality eggs get like broken and whipped up, and then a lot of them get powdered or get sold as liquid eggs for baking and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's are we the only No, we're not the only species that eats other species' eggs, because there are, I mean, I remember like oviraptors was like we thought that there was a dinosaur that's named for it. But there are a lot of species that like steal other species'
I mean,
eggs, right?
Look, a bunny or a deer is not going to turn down an egg it finds on the ground.
Right.
And that may be where some of the Easter bunny myths come from, is seeing Easter bunnies near broken eggs on the ground, either from ground-dwelling birds or whatever. An egg is such a primal form of food that like a huge variety of animals eat them.
Right. And I mean, it's just so nutritious, right? Like there's just so much in a small package there.
So nutritious and not poison. I mean, if you think about like going into the woods and eating some berries, you better be real careful which berries you're eating. But 99.999% of the world's eggs are edible and not poisonous.
Ooh, tell me about this 0.001.
Yeah.
So what do we know? What do we know?
So there are a few species of freshwater gar in Papua New Guinea that have poisonous eggs. And then there are a handful of birds that coat their eggs in a toxic preen oil, where the preen oil would be most unpleasant to eat. But if you're just eating the inside of the eggs, it might be okay.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So it's just on the outside. And that's to kind of like dissuade predation?
Yeah, to dissuade predation.
Yeah.
And the preen oil may also have some antimicrobial effects. So it's sort of like coating your baby in yogurt, there's a probiotic vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's like 3-4 species. That was all I could find. I mean, and just think about how many species on Earth lay eggs. Like, it's a lot.
It's interesting, that obviously there's a parallel because most species who reproduce sexually, this is going to be how the the process begins, whether it begins inside of the organism or outside of the organism. But I think that there's something, I don't know, I'm curious, like just reflecting on the parallels between our own gestational and birthing and, just like pregnancy in human beings versus gestation in other organisms. Obviously, it's the same thing biologically, but we imbue it with so much that it just seems so different.
Yeah, one of the curious things, one of the more curious beliefs, I guess, I arrived at, the more I reported on eggs, was that the power to create new life, whether by humans or by birds, is a tremendous and truly awesome ability. And it's at the basis of like most economic development. I don't know, a lot of economic development. And because of that, there have always been people who are hungry to control that ability. And you can see it in different contexts. So one of my chapters is about the egg wars of the Farallon Islands in San Francisco. And during the gold rush, there was a shortage of food in San Francisco because the city population exploded and the infrastructure couldn't keep up. And so chicken eggs became really expensive. They were going for $1 an egg in the city and as much as $3 per egg out in the gold fields. So, I mean, that's in 1848 money. That's not even in today's dollars. And so there's a lot of money to be made from eggs. You can't have a lot of baked goods unless you have eggs. There's a lot of comfort food that even if it's not a pile of scrambled eggs, if you want pancakes, you need them. And so there were these two brothers who figured out that there was a huge number of seabirds out on the Farallon Islands. And the Farallon Islands are notoriously inhospitable to human life. They were nicknamed the Devil's Teeth by early mariners because they caused a lot of shipwrecks. In fact, they caused so many shipwrecks that the natural harbor of San Francisco probably wasn't settled for quite a long time because people were going out of their way to avoid the Farallon Islands. And there are huge groups of great white sharks that gather there. Normally, great white sharks, hang out in like pairs, but near the Farallon Islands, they hang out in groups as big as 150. Seas are really rough. And these are just jagged rocks sticking out of the sticking out of the sea, and they don't have very much vegetation on them. But what they did have were tons and tons of pinnipeds, so seals and sea lions and walruses, probably providing ample food for the for the aforementioned sharks, and then hundreds of thousands of seabirds, including the common murre. And the common murre lays an egg that's, about double a chicken egg size. It's pear-shaped. It's got squiggles on it, blood red yolk, white that stays translucent when cooked. Ew. And they make a perfectly fine substitute in baked goods. And when they're absolutely fresh, they are great to eat. But it was said that if you ate an old one, it would take you months to get the taste of spoiled fish out of your mouth.
Oh, God.
And so these two guys went out there and they brought back a boatload of these eggs. And the seas were so rough, they lost half of them on the way back. But when they finally made it back to San Francisco, they sold them for about $3,000, this half boatload of eggs. And that is worth something like $100,000 in today's money. The trip was so terrifying that they vowed never to return. But word got out really fast, and within days, there were people trying to stake claims to the eggs on that island. And within a few decades, there was an armed gang war ensuing over control of the eggs. It did like incalculable damage to the local seabird populations, and it enriched a small group of people. And the labor was very, very hard. You know, the guys doing this egg picking, they'd go out, they divided the island into partitions. And on day one, they'd go out and they'd smash every egg they could find. And then on day two, they would go to that same part of the island and they would gather eggs. And that's how they could be assured that the eggs were fresh. There are a lot of different bird species there. The seagulls also wanted the eggs. So, you know, these poor guys were like climbing these steep, slippery cliffs, swinging clubs around their heads to fend off the seagulls. It was very dangerous work. And so, I mean, think about that. That's huge economics based on the theft of eggs. Those birds only lay one clutch of eggs a year. So it's like, you know, all of your babies or all of your potential chicks gone. And, you know, there was tremendous economic power in that. So, yeah. So that's just one example of the economic power of the egg. And I mean, of course, we're seeing another example now with the recent inflation in egg prices and everybody kind of flipping out about it. It brings me back to, I think the New York Times had a butter and egg futures index until about 1940 because they were that important to the economy.
You know, the story that you were just telling, it just, I don't know, I feel like it recapitulates so often with sort of this very human hubris of sort of dominating another culture and extracting from it exactly what serves our purposes without a lot of regard for the ecological impacts, even just like I don't know, the like pain and suffering that it might cause. And, you know, you hear this so often, like they're literally taking the progeny away from these birds.
Yeah. Do you want to hear something really sad?
I don't know. Do I? Maybe. Yes. Let's do it. Okay. Let's do it.
So there used to be this old hobby of collecting bird eggs. Mm-hmm. So in order to collect bird eggs, this was like the Victorian Pokemon Go.
Oh, right. Because they'd be like speckled or light blue or pink or like, but yeah, it's like, collect
more
them all.
Like I need an egret egg. And then,
oh no.
Yes.
Oh, I was thinking like little birds. Okay. That's not good.
Oh no, friend.
All right. Okay.
So you would go out into nature. You had to be a really keen observer because in order to get the eggs, you had to know exactly where a breeding pair was nesting, exactly when the eggs were laid. Because if you got them too late, you wouldn't be blowing out an eggshell. You'd be evicting an embryo. You'd be pouring acid into the shell. And so there was this hobby of doing it. And a lot of the boys who did it grew into obsessed young men. By the way, it was always boys. Mm. Nobody I talked to had ever heard of a female egg collector. Full stop.
Take with that what you will. Or from that what you
I know.
Will. Yeah.
I mean, I'm like Freud would have a field day, right? And so one of the species targeted for this kind of behavior were guillemots, which are a relative of the common murre. Okay. And there were climbers, people harvesting seabird eggs on cliffs in the UK. And one of the like chief prizes for an oologist, as they called themselves, were guillemot eggs because they're quite pretty. They're pear-shaped. They've got the dark brown squiggles on them. They range in color from like kind of a cream color to light tan to green.
Okay.
And individual female birds lay eggs with a distinct squiggle signature.
Okay, so they're like a fingerprint.
Like a fingerprint. And this is supposed to be, so that these birds don't build nests. They just let their eggs, lay their eggs directly onto these cliffs, onto weeds and stuff. And it's so that you can recognize your eggs when you fly back to them, or so the bird could recognize their egg. And the gold standard for some collectors was to take every single egg a female bird laid over the course of her lifetime.
That's horrifying.
Yeah. So the eggs.
They would just single out a mom and not let it ever be a mom.
Yep. And
why?
Because eggs are beautiful.
So I must have them, all of them.
Yep.
That is so fucked up.
And there are even another thing I cover in the book in that same chapter is the modern guys who do it. So in the US, we had this very successful lady-run movement to end, bird killing for ladies' hats, run by Harriet Hemingway and Mina Hall, unsung mothers of the Audubon Society.
Yeah, that was like for the feathers that people were killing, right?
For the feathers.
Yeah,
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the feathered trade was even more brutal in a lot of ways. But so they got they had a tremendously successful activist movement. Within 20 years, they had passed local, state, and federal laws banning the wild bird trade or any kind of trade in wild birds in the U.S., all the way up to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty of 1917. So in the US, after 1917, you weren't supposed to collect eggs. Britain got the same law or similar law, but they didn't get it till 1954. So substantially later. And what this means is that there are still guys out there collecting eggs, fewer and fewer. These guys went out with their dads to collect eggs of rare birds, including raptors, which are a Schedule I protected, many of them are a Schedule I protected birds, and other rare birds of the UK. And it was a huge problem, a problem so huge that the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which is kind of like similar to the Audubon Society, but in the UK, not the same, but similar. They ended up with a wildlife crime unit that worked with police to capture these eggers. And fines were not deterring them because for the people who are truly into it, there is this pathological need to find the eggs, blow the eggs, keep the eggs. They would go to people's houses and find egg collections hidden in purpose-built cabinets that rolled up under couches, inside.
I'd venture to guess that these fools are already pretty rich, and that's why the fines were not deterring
Interestingly, there were people from all walks of life, but the people who were most persistent tended to be more blue-collar types.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and apparently, to me, it's kind of like cosplaying a rich guy.
Okay.
Like the Victorian dudes, of course, they were going out, they were doing this hand over fist. And there are many stories about that. So to me, I think it's yearning for an age of, when the British Empire was supreme. And a lot of them have kind of tragic personal lives, not a lot going on in their life, but they felt good stealing eggs. They're out in all that fresh air. They're doing something clever. They're committing the jewel heist of wildlife crimes. And, and they come back with their booty and secrete it somewhere, hide it somewhere, because it's illegal to have. And so eventually the RSPB lobbied successfully for custodial sentences, jail time. And that seems to have been more successful. It's almost entirely stamped out the problem in the UK.
That's bananas. I can believe it. It just bums me out.
Yeah. And the weird thing is that it's a crime perpetrated by like 100% British men. When I talked to a member of the wildlife crime unit at the RSPB, he told me that like 95% of the people who do this are British men. Even when they hear of egg crimes happening in other countries, it tends to turn out that like it's a British guy who went there on vacation to try to get some exotic eggs.
You know, at the same time, I feel like, and this, I don't think this minimizes my my disgust for this practice, but like at the same time, I'm sitting here going like, that's horrible, that's horrible. And yet we have this sort of not parallel at all, but in some ways parallel, equal and opposite, but not at all equal and opposite practice globally, but especially in the West, of like taking, as you mentioned before, this kind of evolutionary cousin of a forest bird and then just basically turning it into a little robot and, you know, keeping them in these terrible cages and sort of just factory farming the shit out of them so that we can make enough of the eggs that we want to consume. Like, on the one hand, it's like these migratory birds, these large raptors, like these beautiful organisms that are threatened, we're like just making the problem worse by stealing their eggs. But then on the other side, we're like, oh, we have this one organism that we overbreed just to serve purposes for us and like line them up and don't really think about their welfare at all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you think about the proportion, I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's like if you take the biomass of birds on Earth, chickens outnumber all other birds by a couple orders of magnitude.
Which is bananas because there's so many. I mean, there's so much biodiversity among birds.
Yes. Ugh. Yes. But like way more than 50% of the world's birds are chickens.
And that's all just for us to eat either their bodies or their eggs.
Well, capitalism always finds a way too. So the U.S. government and most governments around the world have huge warehouses of chickens protected by men with guns in undisclosed locations because we rely on eggs for the flu vaccine. And there are a lot of interesting studies happening right now. I mean, if you think about a chicken converts feed into protein. And proteins are really hot in the biotech, right? Because they're messengers. I mean, they do like everything. I'm married to somebody in biotech, and he's like, yeah, proteins are big news. And so now there are some efforts to genetically engineer chickens to produce eggs that are full of pharmaceuticals. And there's already an FDA-approved drug for a rare disease that is based on a genetically engineered chicken.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. It makes sense that we already have this organism that we can utilize as a model organism. We understand its genome pretty well. It's very easy to induce. We know the life cycle well. We can induce changes very readily. It makes sense to me. But I think the scale is probably wildly different, right? Like feed eggs, it's probably orders of magnitude more than eggs that we're using for research or medicinal purposes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, clearly. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many. I think it's like maybe 3 flu vaccines per egg, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's an awful lot of eggs. I mean, you're right, though. It probably does. I would be very surprised if it really held a candle to
right, because it's like
the chicken and egg industry.
An individual person can get 1 flu vaccine a year, whereas a person can eat a lot more eggs than that in a year.
I've probably eaten, like 5 dozen eggs this year already.
Yeah, wow.
I don't know. 5 dozen's a lot. I'm thinking like, have I? That's 12 omelets. We're about halfway through that. Like, that doesn't seem unreasonable.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I don't tend to eat eggs very often because there's kind of an ick factor for me. I do once in a while, like in certain dishes, but I'm curious, like, as you're digging into this and you're thinking about eggs, and obviously on the cover of the book, these are chicken eggs. We're talking about feed and chicken eggs a lot because that's kind of our orientation towards them. But you did mention a lot of self-reflection, thinking about your own body, thinking about femininity and womanhood and motherhood, and just the, I don't know, the representation of the egg from that perspective. And I'm curious, like, A, how did you make that shift within your writing? But B, how did you determine, like, where, I don't know, like, where you wanted to put your attention and why?
Yeah, the biggest challenge of the book was to cut down all of the great stories and egg facts that I found to just the stuff that most interested me. And I'm always interested in stories and the narratives we tell about them. And so I knew I wanted to have a chapter on eggs and myth. The cosmic egg is at the beginning of so many different world mythologies. So I was really surprised to learn that. It's at the beginning of things. It's, an egg is magical. It kind of looks like a stone, but like a real smooth, perfectly shaped stone. And then life bursts out of it. Of course, early humans were going to put that into their myth cycles. And then as far as the personal stuff goes, once I realized that I was removing my ovaries while also writing this book, I knew I had to write something about it. And I don't know, like, I guess the big answer is this is just kind of how my brain works. I start digging into a thing and I look at it from a bunch of different angles that are, of course, heavily influenced by my own psyche. Like, I have a whole chapter on the clown egg registry and the copyright code of clowns, because that story was just too good. I couldn't not tell it.
Wait, what?
Oh, yeah.
What's a clown egg? Wait, I'm so confused.
Yeah, okay. Well, so it starts with the clown code. So clowns have an informal code. And the code says you don't rip another clown's makeup or costuming.
Okay.
But clowning...
Oh, right. So they're unique. Like, you wouldn't want to rip somebody off. Okay.
But clowning is a kind of ephemeral art form. So how do you know? How do you know if your face paint has already been done?
Right.
Well, you go to the clown egg registry and you can see the faces of famous clowns, famous and not so famous, immortalized in portraiture done on an eggshell.
Oh.
And
there's kind of like a face?
Oh, yeah. Very much like a face. Usually I talked to the official clown egg artist of Clowns International. And she says that she likes to have pictures of her subjects straight on and in profile. She'll mold little features like, their nose or their ears or whatever else might be prominent. She took a millinery class so she could make little miniature hats that would fit on the clowns. Often the clowns send in scraps of their costumes so that she can do this. And then they're painted. I mean, she's a fine artist with a portrait painting background.
Okay. Yeah.
And so she does a portrait, but just on the egg. Yeah. I mean, I video chatted into Matty the Clown's basement. He's the archivist. And we rummaged through, many of the elements of the collection. The clown egg register currently doesn't have a home, so a lot of it was there. It was just fascinating to learn about, for sure.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I took you on that weird aside.
Hey, I'm all about weird asides. So once I started thinking about my body, my eggs, I mean, there's a piece in the book on this conceptual artist who puts paint-filled eggs up her vagina and then splats them down onto the canvas below.
Okay.
And I found watching her performance kind of reminded me of my own experience of childbirth.
Okay.
I don't know. I think the egg is such a powerful and potent symbol that you can really read a lot into it, see your own image in there. I also discovered a lot of things about chickens that made them very sympathetic to me. Like, okay, I come from this I come from a cancer family. I have a BRCA1 mutation. Tons of people in my family have gotten breast cancer, ovarian cancer, both. Many of them have died. It's very intense. And so I was shocked to learn that the average chicken, if it lives to the end of its life, is very, very likely to develop ovarian cancer. And also chickens ovulate in a way that is similar to the way humans ovulate, which is that an egg bursts through the surface of the ovary and then goes into the oviduct. And there's, according to one model of ovarian cancer, it may be that bursting through activates some cellular response that can lead to cancer. And so chickens are excellent experimental models for ovarian cancer in humans. And so that just made me feel very, very sympathetic.
You know, it's funny. Last year I had a total hysterectomy, not a radical hysterectomy. So I still have my ovaries, but I lost my fallopian tubes, my uterus, and my cervix, of course. And so I remember asking my gynecologist before the surgery, like, you know, so this won't affect she's like, it shouldn't affect your hormone cycles. You're still going to have, a monthly sort of cycle. You're not actually going to have a period because you don't have an a uterus anymore,
Oh, yeah.
but you will still ovulate. And so I was like, where do they go?
Yeah. Where do they go?
She was like, she's like, here, it's a cell. Like your body is just going to absorb it. Like, you know, obviously there's no fallopian tube for it to take and it's not going to, you know, implant. Cause I was like, oh, is there any possibility for it? She was like, no. First of all, like there's a lot of reasons you can't get pregnant after hysterectomy. But also it's like, yeah, the egg just kind of gets released because it still, you know, does, like you mentioned, burst forth through the ovary.
Yeah.
But then you basically it's just in your body tissue at that point. Your body's just going to kind of like absorb it, excrete it, do what it does for any sort of, you know, apoptosis process, like for any sort of cell that is no longer useful.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. I had my tubes and my ovaries out, but I left my uterus and cervix on the premise that I only wanted to get rid of I just wanted to retain as many internal organs as possible. Really.
Same.
I regret it a little bit now, but yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, me same. It sounds like what you did was a preventive procedure because of your BRCA mutation.
Yeah.
For me, I had cervical cancer, so I had to remove the cervix, and you can't just remove a cervix, you've got to take the uterus. And so I kept the ovaries because there was no reason to take them, but they do remove the fallopian tubes now because most cases of primary peritoneal cancer, like basically, that is, you live long enough as a dude, you're probably going to get prostate cancer. You live long enough as a woman, you're going to get cancer in your fallopian tube. So they basically now remove them preventatively because they don't serve a purpose anymore if you don't have a uterus.
Right. And I mean, I think that word purpose is kind of interesting. Just thinking about what the use value of my internal organs is to my doctors versus to me. The doctors were like, you're not going to use that uterus anymore. You should let us take it. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, like, I just kind of want it. I was born with it. I just kind of want to keep it. Keep it.
Nothing wrong with it. It ain't broke. Why are you taking it?
And there was like a long history of ovarian removal in women as part of a hysterectomy, which is undergone by a staggering number of women. I think it's like 1 in 3 in the US, something like that.
Yeah, which of course, removing your ovaries changes completely changes the milieu of all of your hormones.
Yes.
Like there is, do serve like a purpose long beyond just, you know, producing an egg. So
yes, they do. And we took ovaries out of a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Just like you got headaches, would take your ovaries.
Oh, wow. And then of course there's no HRT back then.
Take your ovaries. Yeah.
Ugh, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Ugh, that's awful.
Yeah, not the best. I'm on a lot of forums with people who've had their ovaries out now. And a lot of people, you know, have them out for cancer reasons and can't take HRT for cancer reasons.
Yeah.
And so I have just, you know, all of the sympathy in the world.
Deal with the side effects. Yeah.
Deal with the side effects and do your best.
It's very complicated having the biology of womanhood.
Yeah. And one of the things that makes it complicated is that science just like forgot to study it.
Uh-huh. Well, let's be clear. The men who did science.
The men who did science.
Yeah.
Almost as if there's like systemic sexism.
Right? Like,
I know you're surprised to hear me say that, but yeah, I was shocked when I went into surgical menopause just to have little information there was available.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's my caloric need now?
Yeah. And
nobody
like,
can tell me. Yeah.
I mean, I remember being like, can just removing my uterus, cervix, and fallopian tubes change my hormones? Like, I know that it's the ovaries that have the feedback loop with my brain, but like now there's no feedback loop with my uterus.
Right.
So is there going to be some sort of shrinkage? Is there going to be some sort of, like, factors move back and forth between organs all the time. That's how receptors work. So like, and nobody could tell me that. They were like, it shouldn't happen. I was like, shouldn't happen?
Shouldn't or doesn't?
What is the percentage here? Just like, I don't think so.
Did you find that it altered you?
That
way?
I think here's the thing.
Yeah.
I was on birth control since I was 16, and I utilized the NuvaRing, which now has a generic version. But so this is a little flexible plastic ring that goes inside of your vagina and does like time release of the drug over the course of the 3 weeks. So I had been on that for forever. And when I had to get the DNC and the LEAP, which was diagnostic for the cancer, I had to basically about what they call vaginal rest, right? While it's healing, I couldn't put anything inside of my vagina. And then same thing again, obviously after the hysterectomy, it was like much longer. So it was much more invasive surgery. So because I wasn't on birth control for months, I think that's why I had so many changes.
Yeah.
Like I started breaking out. I had acne. Like I've actually gone back on birth control because of it.
Yeah. And it prevents ovarian cancer.
There you go. So, and that's all I got left down there.
Yeah,
so, got to keep that going.
Yeah. I had a similar like mid-ground experience. I guess I had a mastectomy also. And I felt like my bodily hormones changed after that because I know breast tissue is responsive in some kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, there's so many receptors in that tissue.
Yeah.
And so even if we don't think of these organisms as actively producing a hormone or a factor, those hormones and factors bind to them. And there must be a downstream signaling that's happening there. But it does, I mean, I've had Angela Saini on the show now a couple of times. I had her on recently to talk about her new book about the patriarchy, but her book Inferior, how science got women wrong and the new research that's rewriting the story. I mean, it's really fascinating.
Immediately, I feel that I need to read that book.
Yes. It's basically just all about the fact that literally male scientists were like, clitoris, that's useless. Let's not study that. Or like, let's do a study and include a bunch of people in it. And, none of them are women. Oh, well, that doesn't matter. And it's like, because they're, it's the same. It's just it's just like a man without a penis, right? Like that's what a woman is.
No edits, no comments, no
just
notes.
A man with a womb, right?
Yep.
Like what?
Yep, that's what a woman is. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that in the history of cancer science too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just like William Halsted was such a titan that nobody bothered to do science on his procedures, which were like fully huge developments in their day, but. He lived in the 1890s and there was no reason my grandmother should have been getting a Halsted mastectomy in like 1960.
Right.
Which I don't know what you know, or you probably know about the Halsted, but for the listeners.
The super radical one, right?
Takes your breast, the chest muscles, lymph nodes in your armpit, lymph nodes in your chest, and sometimes part of your collarbone and ribs.
Yeah. I remember reading about this in, what was... Siddhartha Mukherjee's book in the Emperor of All Maladies. And what I didn't realize before was that word radical that we hear before like hysterectomy or mastectomy, the root of that word, we think radical, like, it's so radical. It's like the same root as like radish, like they're pulling it out by the root. That was the reasoning.
And the experience design was awful. So they would put you to sleep, do a biopsy, and if they found cancer, they'd give you a Halsted mastectomy, and then they'd wake you up. So you went to sleep not knowing if you were going to wake up with a Band-Aid from the biopsy or with a Halsted mastectomy. I mean, it was, anyway, my grandmother had 2 Halsteads, and it was hugely psychologically damaging.
Oh, of course.
to
And
her.
nobody gave a shit. And I'm
Yeah.
sure at the time it was like, not only was it like go to sleep and then when you wake up, like, surprise, we did what we needed to do because we're the big bad men and you don't have a say in this. But probably also they were like telling the man, oh, she has breast cancer. You know, like you used to see this all the time where it was like, we need to talk to your husband about your health.
Yeah.
Like, wait,
yeah.
what? Why don't you talk to me? Oh,
They
he
wouldn't
can
even
talk to you.
say the word cancer. It was thought that might upset the patient so much they wouldn't be able to get appropriately treated. But
Right, because she
Yeah.
would become hysterical.
my grandma had 2 Halsteads,
That's horrid.
and one of them was botched, and she just had the feeling that like the surgeons had chainsawed off her breast.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And there was
That's
no
horrid.
reconstruction really in the time, and they didn't really even make breast prostheses until finally the woman who put boobs on Barbie got breast cancer, and she had such a bad experience in the boutique lingerie store that she went to that she formed a task force to go to stores and train people on how to fit mastectomy bras. And she created among the first breast prostheses for people.
Did you
And-
cover this in your last book?
I did, yeah. She was amazing. And one of the places she went in specifically is Nordstrom's. And Nordstrom's still offers mastectomy fits for bras. And they fit me after my mastectomy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You know, it's wonderful. It's needed. It's also a good marketing tactic. Now I'm like, I remember that Nordstrom's had my back when I needed like a surgical bra.
Oh, 100%. We have, before I came, for my listeners, they probably know this, but before I came to Florida to do my internship for my PhD, I was working back at home in LA at Cedars-Sinai in the Cancer Center. And that's where I'll go back for my postdoc here in a few months. And we have like a boutique within the Cancer Center.
Oh, you do? That's so
caters
cool.
towards, like wig fittings, bra fittings, things of that nature. Because we also do a lot. For whatever reason, our like gyne cancers is like a huge part of the individuals that come to Cedar. So we see a lot of people with like breast
famous
and
for
ovarian.
that. Yeah. Like I know Cedars-Sinai from all of my BRCA groups.
Yeah. I'm glad that you. I mean, I appreciate and I'm humbled by you sharing, your own experience, but also the wider application of that experience and just like exposure to those difficulties. I know it got a little bit personal here, and I know that we, obviously we're talking about your book Egg, and that's what we're promoting. But I'm so grateful that you were able to and comfortable to open up about those things, because I think it's something that we don't talk about very candidly often enough.
Yeah, and I mean, back at you with cervical cancer, like that's quite a experience to have had.
I'm coming up on my year anniversary in 2 months.
Woohoo!
Yeah,
Party!
I'm still only 10 months out from that. So it's still pretty recent, but gosh, there's so much more that we could talk about. I'm running out of time. But Lizzie, I'm curious, before we move on to my closing segment, is there anything that you want to make sure that we cover that we didn't have an opportunity to yet? Any big takeaways for the listeners?
Big takeaways for the listeners? I think the big takeaway is to be curious. To be curious about what you eat, to double down on that curiosity, and to ride the wave wherever it takes you, whether that's to space, or to the clown egg registry, or to a performance artist hurling 1,000 eggs at a wall.
I think that dovetails really nicely with my closing questions that I ask all of the guests on my show who come from so many different walks of life. So I'm really curious to hear your perspective on these. They're kind of big picture, so take as much time as you need. But basically, in whatever context feels relevant to you right now, so this could be, it could have to do with your work, but it could also have to do with you personally or community-oriented, national, global, cosmic, whatever. The first thing we'd love to know is what is keeping you up the most at night? Where are you struggling, maybe with a little bit of pessimism or cynicism? What are you legitimately kind of worried about? And then on the flip side of that, where are you finding your hope, your optimism? What are you actually looking forward to?
So without a question, a thing that keeps me up at night is global warming. Or climate change, I guess. It was global warming when I was a kid, but now we say climate change, right?
But it is actually warming also.
It is also warming.
It's not actually a misnomer, but
it's not a misnomer, but it's been politicized in a weird way. Yeah, probably global warming and maybe also gun violence in the United States.
Yeah.
I find both of those things, I don't know, encroaching fascism. Do I have to just pick one?
No, I'm with you across the board.
So
I'm just nodding vigorously.
And where do I find the greatest source of optimism?
Yeah. What are you looking forward to, hopeful about? If you can even find something. I know it's hard sometimes against this backdrop.
A couple places. Okay. I would say I have a 5-year-old, and my 5-year-old is very cute and very positive, and he's a little dopamine machine. So whenever I'm feeling down, I just need to get him in a good mood, and then he'll give me a hug.
Yeah.
And the way he's being taught in school is quite different from the way I was being taught. And he's out, like the 3rd graders had a demonstration to clean up a local brook, and all of the pre-K students went. And I thought that was really beautiful. So that's one place. And another place I'm finding optimism is in the deep friendships that I've developed now that I'm in middle age, because the pandemic did something to reset me, I think a lot of people, to what's important. And I'm finding more time to be with my friends. Making more time for that has been it's been a source of delight and optimism.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that sentiment. And I have to say I think I'm going that route as well. And I'm approaching that, right? This is the year that I turn 40. I'll be 40 in a few months. And I think that, when you start reflecting on what matters and where you're putting your energy and kind of the power and the beauty and just the strength of friendships. And especially, I mean, I don't want to gender it, right? Because I have friends of all genders, but especially sort of like my female friendships. There's something really beautiful there. And I think the love, I think we need to celebrate love in other forms, not just romantic love, culturally.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And I am just a little bit on the other side of 40. And so I guess all I want to say about that is that things just get more awesome.
Yay. Thank you for that. Oh my God. Thank you for that.
You get to stop. You just don't have to tolerate BS anymore unless you decide that it's worth it to you. And you have so much more accumulated wisdom. I look back at 35-year-old me and I'm like, she didn't know anything.
Love it.
So yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you for that.
And if you want to have a spa day with your friends, you can just plan it and go.
Yeah. No guilt, no shame. Just own it. Yeah. You can do it. Total freedom. I love it. Well, gosh, everyone, the book is Egg, A Dozen Overtures by Lizzie Stark. Lizzie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.